Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. This video is about how to learn verbs in Romance languages. So there are other difficulties you will find in Romance languages, like pronunciation or gender, but verbs are generally the hardest thing in most Romance languages. Why is that? Mainly because they have lots of forms and they change for each person. So Romance languages are generally identical when it comes to this, when it comes to the rules. It's just the endings are different. So the tenses are almost the same, it's just the endings will be different. So this advice will work for any Romance language, but the only ones I've studied and that I can actually give advice on are French, Spanish and Italian. So the way verbs work in these languages is you have the base form or the infinitive. For example, let's take parler in French. So you have the base form and you take away the last two letters and then you change it based on that. So then what you do is you add the letter to the end depending on the tense. This is how it should work anyway for regular verbs. These are verbs that follow the rule. But then you have irregular verbs, which are verbs which do not follow the rule. So these are what they should be in French and this is what they are. So you need to memorize these. But this is only showing the present tense. There are way more tenses like these. And this is just showing the what's called the indicative mood. There's also the subjunctive mood, which have these endings. So how do you learn all these? What I don't recommend, as always, is staring at tables and trying to memorize them all at once. This generally does not work. I generally use the same technique for everything. So what I do is I read things and I translate the words that I don't understand, and it's too time consuming to look up the gender, not the gender, but the person and the tense of each verb. So what I do is I pick the most common verbs. So these are verbs like to be, to know, to talk, to write, to hear, to watch. So every time I see these verbs, I will look up the tense and the person and save it in the definition. I'll use an example from Spanish here, just because that's the language I'm studying at the moment, but this works for any language. Okay, so this is just a random article about space. So here we have the word dijo, which if I click on this and go to dictionary, you can see it means decir, means to say. And if we go all the way down to here, we can see it highlighted. It's basically past simple. It's what I call it. It's pretérito perfecto simple is what it is technically. But anyway, so it's he, she, past simple. So he, she, past simple, and I save it in the definition. Okay, the next verb we have that's common, and the common verb is an, which is they have present. If I do the same thing here, so it's here, they have present, and I save that in the definition. And I do this with every common verb. So another one would be, okay, the next one we have is tenemos un problema, which is present, we, tener. So this is what I do. I save it for every common verb I find. I save who is it, so it's it, you, I, he, and which is the verb and which is the tense. So you don't need this software in order to do this. What you could simply do is you could look them up online every time you see the verb. Maybe you read an article online and then you look it up online, look up the conjugation, so you know which tense and which person it is. Or you could write them down and look it up that way. It's your choice really. What you need to do is just remind yourself. You need to just constantly remind yourself of each tense and each person every time you see these verbs. And at a certain point you just start remembering them. Simply just repetition. If you look at something enough times, you start to remember. Of course, you can look up conjugation tables at some point just to remind yourself, but just don't look at them all the time and try to memorize them. Now let's talk about the subjunctive, which is another problem we'll have in Romance languages. So the subjunctive is a bit complicated, but you can get used to it. Basically, it's another form of... Basically, there's another conjugation for every verb, and it's used when you're expressing an opinion, a desire, a wish, or necessity. And it normally comes with the word for that in every language. So you say, I think that, it's necessary that, or I want that, something like this. It is generally identical over different languages, but there are some small differences. For example, in Spanish and French, if you use the phrase, I think that, it will only use the subjunctive form if it's a negative sentence. So for example, I think that, it wouldn't be subjunctive. I do not think that, it would be subjunctive. Whereas in Italian, it's always subjunctive if it's positive or negative. So there are some differences you need to learn depending on the languages you're learning. So the main thing you need to know with the subjunctive is, number one, when do you use it, depending on the language, and two, what endings to use. So here I'll show an example of some sentences in Spanish. Okay, so here we have some example sentences which show basically the subjunctive in Spanish. So first we have, Señor, necesito que venga conmigo. So here we have the phrase, it's necessary that, which is something you need to save as a phrase for the subjunctive. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to highlight this, and I have a tag called subjunctive phrase, like this, subjunctive phrase. And what does that mean? So it creates a phrase, so it has the to there next to it. When I go over this, okay, it's including that. I'm not sure why it's doing that. I think that's a glitch, doesn't matter. Anyway, every time I see this, I see subjunctive phrase. What does that mean? It means the subjunctive should follow this. So I see that because I see venga, and I know this is subjunctive. So I see this and I know it's subjunctive. So say if I go and look this up. So it'd be vienes. So vengo, vienes, viene is the present. But this is venga, vengas, venga. So I know this is subjunctive. So I see the subjunctive after this, necesito que, so I know it's a subjunctive phrase. Okay, next one we have me alegro de que sonríes, which is basically I'm happy that you smile. And I can save this as another one as well. So alegro de que is another subjunctive phrase. So the reason why we save this is to know when do we use the subjunctive. Because the two things you need to know with the subjunctive, which endings to use, when to use them. Here we have esperemos que vaya bien. Espera is like let's hope that it goes well. So let's hope that. Another subjunctive phrase. Subjunctive phrase. Okay. And you do this with everything, and you see here vaya is ir, he, she subjunctive. Sonrías, I haven't saved, let's do that now. So sonrías, we sonríes if it's present, or indicative, it's sonrías, so it's subjunctive you. So you go you, subjunctive. And this is what you do. So just to show you all of the subjunctive phrases that I've saved, like esperemos que, alegro de que, necesito que, posible que, hasta que, basically all the phrases where I've seen que and then the subjunctive, I'll save as a subjunctive phrase, so I know when to use it. There's also a non-subjunctive phrase, which is basically when I see a phrase with que that doesn't have the subjunctive after it. So this is how I learn when I use the subjunctive, and looking up the endings tells me which endings to use. So I'm basically just doing the exact same thing. When I see it, I save it as subjunctive. But I also save the phrase before if it's a phrase with that, or if it's a phrase that the subjunctive should follow afterwards. So I save that as well, so I know when to use it. Of course, there are some situations where there isn't a phrase and it's simply just part of a sentence, but you can generally learn these through context or looking up the rules afterwards. I'll give you an example of this. So in Spanish, when you give someone a command, you use the subjunctive when it's a negative form for some reason. So you would use, I guess, the imperative normally if it's a positive, but when it's a negative you use the subjunctive, and this is just a weird exception that I found. But generally it doesn't happen this way, and it has a phrase with that. So of course I'm not always perfect with these verbs. I can forget things, especially in languages I haven't practiced enough. And normally when I speak, I normally have the conjugation tables open so I can look at them if I forget a verb. So it generally just takes practice and repetition, but sometimes you will just forget, and especially with the irregular verbs it can be very difficult because there aren't really any rules. So that's all for this video. I thank you for watching. If you have any questions about learning verbs in these languages, put it in the comments, and thank you for watching.